Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lead Different podcast. Today's guest is Chris Lowney, the board chair of Common Spirit Health, the largest nonprofit healthcare system in the U.S., with an annual revenue of $34 billion. He is a former managing director at J.P. Morgan. He has held leadership roles across New York, Tokyo, Singapore, and London until 2001. He is a respected speaker on leadership, ethics, and decision-making, and he's presented in over 20 countries. He is the author of 6 books and co-author of 2 more. The one that brought me to him is this book, The Bestselling Heroic Leadership. This book has been translated into 11 languages and was named to the recommended reading list of the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Chris Lowney.
Hey, Dan. How are you?
I am outstanding. How are you, Chris?
I'm fine, thanks.
Welcome to the Lead Different podcast, and thank you for being a guest. You know, I'm reading that introduction, and one of the really cool things about having this podcast is getting the opportunity to meet people like you. I read Heroic Leadership, I think in 2006, when I was starting my leadership journey, and it has been the go-to book that I share with. Now, I did that for 17 years in different leadership roles at the company that I was working at. And so a lot of the leaders I worked with, I shared that book with. I read that, and I read Heroic Living. It's been such a great book. It was recommended to me by a good friend of mine who happened to be a Jesuit priest. And I'd love to, for those people that are listening that don't know the background, tell us a little bit about Chris Lowney and where the leadership principles come from, and how you came to share them in the book, Heroic Leadership.
Yeah. So you
And embrace self.
He know the background. Tell us a little bit about Chris Lowney and where the leadership principles come from, and how you came to share them in the book, Heroic Leadership.
Yeah. So you gave me a nice background, so I won't, nice introduction, so I won't repeat everything you've said. But maybe just to give the 1-minute version and tie it to writing the book. So I'm from New York City, grew up in Queens. I went to a high school, the Jesuits, and I joined the Jesuits right after high school. And I was never a priest. I was a seminarian. And when I realized that my calling in life was not to be a priest, I did the next logical thing, which is go into investment banking. And I ended up working at J.P. Morgan and Company for a number of years. And when you work in one of these big companies, people are giving you books about leadership every month, and some of them are great, far better than anything I've ever written. But some of them are also pretty shallow. And it used to sometimes cross my mind that the formation I got in seminary as a Jesuit was actually more relevant to leading in the real world than some of the stuff you get in these books of tips and tactics and so on. So when I left J.P. Morgan, I thought it might be interesting to write something that tried to translate into everyday language principles that for Jesuits would have very deep religious roots, and principles that, at least as I saw it, was key to their, what they wouldn't use the word culture, well, we might use culture. And the way I would see it is really a culture of leadership. So the book takes 4 pillars, 4 ideas that I would consider deeply important to leading well in one's life, whether personal life or organizational or business life.
So you mentioned the 4 pillars, which are so important. You know, in the pre-show, you and I were talking about it, and again, this is such a great book. I love the way it's organized, and the 4 pillars really do make a ton of sense. And we start with self-awareness. Now, at the Lead Different podcast, we work with leaders who are willing to step out of the box and be different, look at different ways of doing things. You know, it's interesting that something that comes from a 450-year-old company is actually now new and different. So starting with self-awareness, why is self-awareness so important for a leader?
Yeah, you know, I think nowadays it's more or less accepted as axiomatic, and I think other research really backs up presume to give an exhaustive answer to your question, so on. And you know, I think the people who are leading most effectively are folks who are making some kind of an individual connection and understanding, okay, what are not just what is my self-awareness, my strengths and weaknesses, but what are your strengths and weaknesses, and what are your aspirations for your life and career in this place, and how can I help you to be a better performer? You know, the core job of any manager is to help people to flourish, to help them to perform at their best potential, and that's what we owe people as human beings. But from the organizational point of view, that's how organizations perform their best, when you get a pile of people who are all performing at their individual best. So yeah, so what one piece of the question you asked, I think, has to do with the manager's willingness and commitment to try to understand folks you're working with. And you know, the second part of your question was about what Common Spirit would look for when we hire people. And, you know, it would, of course, vary at some levels. We have over 100,000 employees, and some of the job skills are very, very different. And so therefore, I would in no way presume to give an exhaustive answer to your question. But I mean, I'd say 2 or 3 things. If you're not competent, you're not going to get hired. But too often, competence is the only thing people are looking for. And for us, competence is kind of an entry ticket. I mean, if you're not competent, you can't get in the game, but that doesn't mean you get to play. And, you know, we care a lot about how we treat each other. And so people buy our values in terms of interpersonal relationship is really important. Our sense of mission is really important to us. You know, we totally respect that people want to get ahead in their individual careers, but if they're not folks who are signing up for the mission of our ministry, of our organization, then there really is not going to be a home for them. So, you know, managers are going to be on the lookout for those kinds of things, among others, when they're going through a hiring process.
You know, you bring something up that I think is really important in industry, and you talked about competence. In industry, we tend to promote people based on their competence. And what I mean by that, I worked in sales for a long time. We would take our best salesmen and we would promote them to manager because they were really good salesmen. I remember when I first got promoted, I went to my manager and I said, well, you know, Bruce, I don't know that you should promote me. I haven't won President's Club yet. Shouldn't I be the top salesman in the company before you promote me? And he said something that sticks with me today. And when I talk to leaders, I remind him of this. He said, Dan, I'm not promoting you because you're a good salesman. I'm promoting you because you're a good leader. we promote people based on their competence, sometimes at the expense of their leadership. And I think one of the things that I learned reading the book and learning more about self-awareness is when you know who you are, you can lead better. And you brought up the importance of knowing the people that work for you. So not just knowing their competence, which we know that's as you said, that's the entry ticket, but what are their motivations? What is it that's important to them? Where do they want to go? And does that align with the mission that I have in my department within Common Spirit or within any organization? Does that align so that we can both move together forward in a positive direction? Thank you so much. That gives me a lot of material that I have more questions that I want to ask around that, but I want to get to all four pillars. So I want to get to the next one. The second one is ingenuity. So ingenuity says we're going to confidently innovate and adapt to a changing world. And you talk about, when we start with the Jesuits and St. Ignatius and being an organization that went throughout the world, instead of staying and having people come to them, they went out to the world. How do we translate that to today's leaders?
Yeah. So as an idea, that is always the easiest sell. I mean, everybody in the 21st century will sign up to the idea that, okay, look, the world is become very complex. It's changing very rapidly. It's volatile. And the only people and organizations that are going to do well are people and organizations that are able to adapt. Big surprise. I mean, who doesn't know that? Who doesn't agree with that? And I think if there's something unique that the Jesuit culture and tradition and history brings to that discussion, I would describe it this way: that a lot of times, if I could oversimplify, what we tend to do as managers or companies is we're sort of screaming, oh my gosh, the world is changing. You need to change too, or else we're not going to make it. And everybody knows that. That's really adding nothing to our ability to actually execute and succeed at that. And to me, a great insight that the founder of the Jesuits had was that, if I could put it in my own words and paraphrase, that he felt, when we had important decisions to make in life, when we reach turning points, for example, when there was a choice about doing something a different way or the way it's always been done, we often get in trouble, not because we lack the right data, not because there are stupid people sitting around the room making the decision. Rather, our trouble begins in a way before we even enter the decision process, because we all carry around what I would call baggage. Of course, he doesn't use that word in the 16th century. He used the word unhealthy attachments. Right. We all carry around these inner demons, these biases that get in the way of being free and open to leading in whatever way the data, evidence, information should lead us, consistent with our mission. So that sounds a little theoretical. To be a little more concrete and practical, we have to decide whether or not to enter a completely new market, whether or not to make an investment and build something new. And we're sitting around having a discussion, and reasons are coming out of our respective mouths. But maybe for half of us, inside, we're crippled by this fear of making a mistake, or of not wanting to try something unless we're 100% sure it's going to work. And in the modern world, we're never 100% sure. Or we don't want to do something because it's not consistent with the way we've always done it before, or we don't want to do it because it's his idea, not mine, and I always feel like I want to win. So we have these bundle of attachments, this baggage inside us, And the great insight, I think, of the founder of the Jesuits, and the great pointer to the rest of us who want to be ingenious, is before we face a major decision, especially at a moment that's going to involve doing something new or change, instead of just looking at the external evidence and the Excel spreadsheets and so on, we also need to look inside and try to drag into consciousness any baggage, any fears, any biases that could get in my way and prevent me from making the best choice.
Really good stuff, Chris. Here's a question. How do you, as a leader, and how do you empower your leaders below you to help people not have that fear? Because it's easy for us to say, if we're the CEO, to say, oh guys, don't be afraid, don't how do you create a culture where failing forward is accepted, and it's okay to make mistakes? Obviously don't want to bankrupt the company or make a decision that has long-term impact, but how do you empower people to feel comfortable taking chances, being willing to do something that's out of the box and different, but that fits the mission, so that they're not crippled by fear?
Yeah. So I'm not the one to have invented the important cliche that a leader's best example is what he role models. Mm-hmm. And, look, I mean, if somebody takes a prudent risk and makes a mistake, if I or somebody else jumps down the person's throat, then okay, we've sent an important message about whether risk-taking is really encouraged and tolerated in this place or not. So, to me, the very most important way we signal to folks that we want to have an environment where we're willing to try new things is how I react when people do try things and it doesn't work out. So that's one thing I would say, and the second is simply how I approach the team when we're on the verge of making important decisions as a group. In other words, do we take a step as a group of trying to inventory any of the biases or fears that could get in the way if we're not careful?
Yeah, you can't have ingenuity with fear. And so thank you for that great example. And I love that. I think too many times we forget, it's ingenuity is great as long as it works, right? Oh, please keep doing it. I had a gentleman on the podcast who talks about, a lot of times we hire leaders because of their ingenuity, because they're different, they're willing to think outside the box. But that's also sometimes the reason we fire them, because we don't give them the opportunity to lead different and to have the freedom to do the creative things that we wanted them to do. As soon as that doesn't fit what we wanted to do, or that doesn't succeed 100%, our want to succeed, our willingness to be open to that failure goes away a little bit when the numbers are hit. And so I think you hit on a great point. At the end of the day, we're leading people. It's not about, as you said, it's not about the spreadsheet. It's about the people. You still have to get results. But if you have people and you give them the ability to be themselves and be their best selves, and you help them become their best selves, they're going to give you great results.
Yeah, true. And, to the first part of your comment, we have this vicious cycle you see often enough where I'm unhappy that I have a group of people that are too wedded to the status quo. And so I'm going to bring in someone from the outside precisely because I want some interesting new ideas from the outside. And then the culture eats them alive because that's not the way we do things here. And we don't really welcome new ideas. And, the person gets chewed up and leaves. So, right. We end up becoming our own enemy in a sense.
Yeah, so very important. I love that someone at a high level of an organization has to understand that as you bring those people in, you also almost have to put some guardrails around them so that they can succeed, and then let the people around them know, hey, this is why we're bringing them in. Let's make sure we support them. So thank you for sharing that. Let's go to the third one, because it's really tied to this. And the third pillar of Jesuit leadership is love, to engage others with a positive attitude that unlocks their full potential. And I think you talked about it a little bit, but it is so important, I think, to understand people. It's the old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that goes double for leaders, to show somebody that you love them enough to care about what their goals are, what their, and love is not used in the workplace much. So I'd love to get your take on this, because it's going to be very important for leaders that are listening to know how to implement this pillar.
You know, I mean, I didn't walk around JP Morgan hugging people and telling them I loved them, and I'm not suggesting that anybody listening start doing that in their organizations either. But, you know, anyway, the founder of the Jesuits said that love ought to manifest itself in deeds, not in words. And so maybe we could unpack that a little bit. And, you know, love is a really tricky word, a little bit radioactive in a workplace. You know, I totally get that. When I was writing the book, I used to think about folks I worked with on trading floor. I wasn't a trader, but folks that on trading floors in JP Morgan say, oh man, you know, what are people going to make out of this? And, you know, then the natural alternative word would be like, oh, you know, respect or deep respect or something like that. But of course, respect is in everybody's value statement, and half of people feel like they're treated like animals, and so they have a complete jaundiced idea of that word. So in the end, I felt like, okay, love is the word the founder of the Jesuits used, so I'm going to roll with that. And now let's understand what it really is. From from Aristotle forward, the definition of love that the philosophers always have given us is to love is to will, to wish, to want the good of another, and to work for it, to work toward that. And when you think about it, I presume, I hope, then the idea really clicks into place, because surely your job as a manager is for the good of your people to be served. And what's the good is that each of us be dealt with fairly, that each of us have a chance to grow, that each of us be challenged, that each of us have a shot at reaching our full potential. That's love. People sometimes, when they hear the word, think that what it means, what I'm trying to say is that we're always nice to everybody. And in no way at all am I suggesting that. And if we understand the word in the way it's intended, that's not what the word means. So, I mean, it may be that I have a team member who has, I don't know what, talent, but terrible confidence problems. And maybe I do need to be kind of nice or nurturing to get this person to perform at their potential. Mm-hmm. Maybe person B has a lot of talent, but's completely lazy. And they don't need me to be nice. They need me to kick their ass, you know, and that's what's going to help them perform at their potential. And I suspect it's also clear to everybody listening that, you know, look, if I can get everybody on the team to reach their full potential on behalf of the organization and mission, then surely as an organization, we're going to achieve our best. I mean, if all our players are performing well, how could the organization not perform well also? So yeah, to me, it's an idea that maybe at first blush sounds strange or out of place, but as soon as we begin to dissect it and understand what it really means, I think it becomes a very logical, we use the word pillar, a very logical foundational idea around which a manager might not want to build his or her rhetoric. That's not what I'm saying. Tell people I love them, but build his or her mental attitude toward his job as a manager leader.
You know, you brought up a lot of really good points there, Chris. One of them, you know, I think when you look at that definition that you use, to want the good of another and to work for it, I think at the end of the day, we all want to be the best version of ourselves. And when you as a leader are pushing people to be the best version of themselves, it's not only going to help them, but it's going to help the organization. If everybody around you, everybody that works for you is working to be the best version of themselves, and you're giving them the tools. And I love that you personalized it, because you're right. Dan might be really sensitive and might have some confidence issues. So you might have to approach him a little bit differently than you approach Tom over there, who's got all the confidence in the world, but maybe he's not as much competence, right? Dan might be way more competent, but he doesn't have the confidence to show himself as competent as he is, where the other person is. So you work with them within the guidelines that they have. At the end of the day, I think we all want to reach that exit interview and have God say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Right. And, one of the things I talk about, there's such a thing is, especially as I've gotten into my 50s, you don't want to, when you're in your 50s, you don't hear too much about potential, because there's not a whole lot left, right? You want to be hearing about the accomplishments you've made. And I always think about this. I want to get to that exit interview, and I'd like to hear, "Hey, Dan, here's the gifts I gave you, and here's what you did." The worst thing I want to do is say, "Hey, Dan, here's the gifts I gave you, and here's what you did with them." Don't hide them under a bushel. Yeah. But as leaders, I think it's our job to make sure that the people that we lead also lead to their best potential. We bring out the best in them. And I think that's love, right? Biblically, your friend is not the one who looks at you messing up and says, "Oh, it's okay, Chris. It's okay. You're doing your best." Your real friend is going to say, "Hey, you can do a lot better than that. And how can I help you be even better?"
Yeah, you talk about the kind of ultimate exit interview in life, I suppose. But even in a more proximate, real world sense, I read a great quote once from Sheryl Sandberg that folks would recall as the COO of Facebook, and she said, "Love is something like, love is making others better as a result of your presence. Leadership is making others better as a result of your presence, and making sure that impact lasts in your absence." So, if as a manager, the folks who work for you are better, and even after you've left the organization yourself for 10 years, they're still better, or they've left, they're still better, then, that's great managerial work.
Right. It's that coaching tree. You hear about it all the time in sports, and the NFL coaches whose assistants become head coaches. And I think if you're a good leader, whether your people stay with you and they move up in your organization, or they leave your organization and they're leading other organizations, that's the mark of a good leader. You've made other leaders better in your wake. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great way. I think, of course, the author of the book would have a great way to talk about love in the workplace. And let's talk about the final pillar, heroism, energizing others and yourself with heroic ambitions and a passion for excellence. I don't think any company out there is saying, "Well, we just want to be average. We want to be excellent." But I hear this all the time. There are those leaders who are rah, let's go do it. But it's empty because you're not giving the resources, or you don't have the capacity, or it's an illogical goal given the resources that you have. So how do you set heroic ambitions or heroic goals that are realistic and that are attainable, and yet continue to push to the highest potential that the team has?
Yeah. So the way you defined it there, you were reading exactly from the book, and absolutely that's what I said in the book. I must say, as the years have gone by, I have started to speak about this somewhat differently, because heroism conjures up different images for all of us. For a lot of us, something heroic is, I don't know what, either somebody is burning, there's a building on fire and I save somebody. That is heroism in a unique way. Or it's the Super Bowl and I'm the one who made the winning catch. And in that respect, heroism becomes somehow about me. And really the essence of the idea is the opposite of that. That what's really heroic is when we're working for something that's bigger than ourselves. It's not about me. And, organizations do a bad job when you get a pile of people who are all showing up thinking, how do I get ahead? How do I get ahead of that one? How do I increase my status in this place? And organizations perform well when you get a pile of people who are showing up, and folks' guiding impulse is, well, yeah, I mean, of course I want to get ahead, but I recognize that I'm here to invest some of my energy and time and ego into a purpose that's bigger than me and worthy of my allegiance. And that to me is the essence of what I think we're getting at here, or whether it's my personal life, my family, organizationally, where we kind of understand that we're here for purposes bigger than ourselves and our own ego. And as those purposes become clear to us, and the worthier they are, the more it kind of draws us toward excellence in terms of our ambitions and performance and so on, because we say, oh, this is not just a job. This is something that is really going to be a service to the common good, to humanity, to whatever it may be, and I'm willing to invest some of my time and energy to helping us get there.
As you were talking about that, it reminded me about a portion in the book that talked about the Jesuit motto of 𝑀AGIS, always striving for something more. And I think that understanding that even what you've done already, there's always more that you can do. How do you best define 𝑀AGIS? I'm trying to think of, how do I talk about 𝑀AGIS as a motto? So doing something greater, and you talked about doing something above and beyond, something greater than ourselves. Part of what we do in leadership is sometimes we're planting, what's the saying? We're planting trees under whose shade we shall not sit, but we're creating those leaders that are going to lead the future leaders. How would you define it, Chris?
Yeah. So, you use the Latin word 𝑀AGIS, the more, the greater, and, that is a kind of a Jesuit slang code. And as you know, the whole idea of the book was I was trying to translate into very broad environments for people who have different or no religious or spiritual backgrounds, these ideas that for Jesuits are very core to their spirituality. And now, so to use precisely the idea of 𝑀AGIS, it's slang or shorthand in Jesuit speak that they want to make choices that are for God's greater glory, 𝑀AGIS, ad maiorem Dei gloriam. And so the point of their life is, okay, it's not about me. It's not about what my glory, my status, my getting ahead, my ego. I'm here for God's greater glory. And so as I translate that into the more general landscape, what I'm kind of saying is, okay, look, heroism means that you're here not for your own ego, but for purposes that are greater than you and worthy of you, however you happen to construe that in your own personal and organizational life, and consistent with your own spirituality, whatever that may be.
I love that you brought up ad maiorem Dei gloriam. My daughter's school, Holy Child Catholic School in Albuquerque, their motto is ad maiorem Dei gloriam. And so love that you brought that up. One of the things that the book talked about also, and I think and I used it with my teams, it was the motto de proceder. It becomes if you use the 4 pillars and you're looking and you're using self-awareness, ingenuity, love, and heroism, it becomes a way of being. And you see it in organizations that truly know themselves and know each other. When you see them, you see that team walking down the hallway into a negotiation, that there's a confidence about them. It's the way of being, a way of doing things. It becomes, motto de proceder, maybe it's your modus operandi, and everybody knows that, hey, if you're working with Chris Lowney and his team at Common Spirit, there is something we can expect from that group, whether it's Common Spirit or any organization. If we're bringing our best selves to the table and we're bringing our best people forward and we're helping people develop, there's a way that they're going to appear that's going to look different than others. And I see that all the time in successful organizations, and I also see that it's missing in those organizations that are not successful. What is other than reading the book and implementing some of the principles, what's the best way that leaders can make sure that they're creating that kind of environment?
Yeah. So you use the phrase that they use, and then of course I repeat it in the book, our modo de proceder, our way of proceeding. And you know, I had forgotten that. I knew that when I was a Jesuit, that phrase, I guess. I had forgotten it, and when I went to write the book and rediscovered that phrase, it kind of was a validation to me that I was absolutely on the right track. Not that I'm smart, but that I happened to stumble onto something that was insightful and wise and profound. And it's this, that when I started working at JP Morgan, we had an incredibly powerful culture, and it was really the envy of the financial services industry at the time. And the great definition of culture that I remember from that time, which I still find the most accurate, is the way we do things around here. Mm. And in places that have good cultures and strong cultures, you kind of know, you come to know, no, and even when somebody joins or when somebody's new and they kind of do something that's a little off base, you're going to count on somebody to be the one to say, wait a minute, that's not quite the way we do things around here. And I think in crappy organizations, everybody says they have a culture. In crappy organizations, it's just a set of things that are written on paper. But in fact, the way we do things around here, the real culture is completely different. In really successful organizations, the way we do things around here is what we state. You know, the two things are aligned. And so, you know, I saw in the Jesuit phrase, our modo de proceder, 400 years ago, before anybody had any idea of culture, these guys had a way of talking about what we today would call culture. You know, it's our way of proceeding. There's a way we do things, and we're going to eject like a virus people who can't or don't want to live and work according to the values that we think are important in the way we do business with others and treat each other and so on.
No, that is so true, and it's, you know, I love I'm working with one of my clients is a priest, and one of the things he says, you know, Dan, what's actually really cool is the new and better way is actually the old way. We just have to go back, and you just went back 450 years to find, hey, this is what works, right? We have to have a way of proceeding, and the culture creates itself, and people hold each other accountable for that. I've got one more question because I know we're running low on time, but I want to make sure I ask about this. I often get asked to talk about faith and leadership. It's easy for Chris Lowney because he's leading a Catholic organization, a Christian organization, to incorporate your faith into the work that you do. What advice would you have to a faith-driven leader who is working in a more secular sector to be able to incorporate their faith without overwhelming or, you know, being overbearing on those people in their organization who may not be of faith, but in order to bring it forward in a positive way?
Yeah. So let me say a couple of things before I answer your question. You know, the first thing is you kindly say I'm leading a faith-based organization or a Catholic organization. I forget how you put it. And well, you know, look, I mean, I hope I contribute to leadership, but there are lots and lots of people who are leading the place forward. And, you know, it's core to my understanding of leadership that everybody leads in their own capacity. So I kind of would push back in the idea that somehow the leader, you know, I'm a board chair, and I hope I do a good job of that. But there's leadership is very, very widespread. That's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is I think one of the diseases of modern life is a kind of split lifeism. Where a lot of us have deep beliefs, whatever our tradition might be, whether I go to mosque on Friday or temple Saturday, church on Sunday, whatever that my tradition is. A lot of us have beliefs, and what goes on in worship or when we pray is one thing, and then we go to work and we feel like we need to be a different person. And that's that kind of a split life is it's really very enervating. It's really hard to sustain that, and I think at the end of the day, that you need to live a whole life somehow in order to feel good about your life project and feel like it's meaningful. And by no means am I in the least implying that I'm the exemplar of what I'm talking about. I mean, we're all on a journey, and we all struggle, and we all do some things well and other things less well. But I guess what I do feel, at least as a principle, is that part of my job as a human is to try to extract from my belief system some day-to-day values that I can then bring to what I do all day. And, in many, I worked in the Northeast in investment banking, in the work culture of that environment, we're not there to sit down and talk about what our own confessional beliefs may be. That's not right. That's not appropriate in those kind of cultures. But hopefully in any culture, wherever we work, what we can do is say, okay, here's a set of values in terms of how human beings should be treated and how customers or clients should be treated coming from my beliefs. And I'm going to try to bring those to work every day. And in that respect, have a kind of a whole integrated life rather than a split life.
That's a great term, and I'm gonna use that, Chris. Split lifeism. Just bring your whole self to the table. And I think it also, one of the things that I think is very evident is if you're living your beliefs, whatever they are, as you said, mosque or wherever it is that you worship, there's good teachings that come from any faith. And if you live those teachings, you're going to bring people together, and people are going to automatically see those as positives in what you bring to the table. So you're not, as you said, bringing everyone, hey, we've got to all go to mass together because I'm Catholic. It's, hey, I'm going to live as a good Catholic, as a good Christian, and bring an example to the workplace that others will want to follow and may or may not follow us on that journey. But that's a great way to put it. Any closing thoughts, Chris? Thank you so much. As we finish here, is there a question I should have asked? Is there anything else we want to make sure and touch on before we let our listeners sign off for the day?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for the chance to chat. The last thing I would say is only this, that we spoke often in leadership in the realm of folks who are actually managing other people, and that's often in a stereotypical way the way we understand leadership, that it has to do with managing other people. But core to what I wrote and what I speak about is, I feel at the end of the day, each person has a leadership opportunity and responsibility, and that's not gimmickry. We all are pointing away by our behaviors, how we use our time and so on, and we're having some influence, and that's the dictionary definition of leadership, pointing away and having some influence. So I just hope that whether folks are individual contributors in families, students, or managing a Fortune 500 company, they equally would feel, oh yeah, these ideas somehow relate to me as well.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much, Chris. Lead Different podcast listeners, thank you so much for listening in. Don't forget to like the podcast. Don't forget to comment. And don't forget to share it with your friends. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today, Chris. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and we look forward to airing the podcast soon and sharing it with our audience. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next week on the Lead Different podcast.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.